Good morning. Welcome to another day of Avodah. We're up to Yud Aleph Amid Aleph, and we were discussing the relationship between Rabbi and Antoninus. We digressed for a second to say that the person Ketiyah Bar Shalom also warranted the next world, albeit he was Megayer. It seems he was Megayer. Even though he had a bris milah, it's interesting because if for Gerish you needed tefillah also. He didn't have a tefillah, but anyway. So those two people, Antoninus and Ketiyah Bar Shalom, they were zeicha to the next world. So the Gemara now tells us another story about a very, very famous Roman. Unkelis bar Kloinimus, Igayer. Unkelis, l'chayri, the Unkelis of Targum Unkelis fame, was Megayer. Shad the Kesa Gunda de Roima Abasrei. So the Caesar, who wasn't very happy, he sent a bunch of Romans after him. Now we had this Gemara in Hanizaken, in the Gemara of Kamsa bar Kamsa, if you might remember. And it was said there that Unkelis was the nephew of Titus HaRasha. That Unkelis was the nephew of Titus HaRasha. And the Gemara there was discussing that Unkelis was deciding to be Megayer or not, and he brought back Bilam, he brought back Yeshu, and he wanted to get information. The bottom line is, this is a more, I don't know, elaborate on that Gemara, but it's an addendum to that Gemara. So he sent the case that the Caesar sent these Romans to bring him back. Mashchina B'kroi, but Unkelis, who L'chaira was a very, very influential person, he was able to influence them by Pesukim the Torah and Igayer, and they also were Megayer. Hada Shada Gunda de Roimoy Achrina Basrei. He sent another bunch. And Amr Lahub and the Caesar told him, like Simru Lev Midi, don't say anything to him. He's going to be too influenced on you, so don't say anything to him. They were taking him along. Amalu, he said, let me tell you something. So, Nifyoira nakat nura, kame pif yoira. Pif yoira leduchsa, duchsa lehegmaina lekaima. So Rashi brings that all these were different sorim of Rome, and one was higher than the next. So, kaima mi nakat nura mikame inshi. So the derech is that the lower you are in the totem pole, that's the one who would hold the ner in front of the other one. And finally, the king, right? Who would hold, now, would a king ever hold a torch in front of normal people? So Amrilay said no. So Amrilahu, what did Unkelis tell them? HaKadosh Baruch Hu nakat nura mikame Yisrael. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he goes ahead and he holds the fire in front of Yisrael. D'chsiv, Hashem right? In the Midbar, Hashem went, the Amid Onans, Amid Aish went in front of them. Eze Igayu Kula, they will, sure enough, they all, wow, this is the rich, this guy, Lubavitch would have hired him in a second, right? He's so successful. Anyway, Hodeshad Gudachrina Basrei, for the third time, he sent a bunch of people after him. Amrlahu, Tishtu midi ba'adei. Not only don't talk to them, but even if he says something to you, don't discuss anything with them. No, this is Hinakalev Ozlei. They were taking him out. Chazam mezuzah de moncha apischa. He saw a mezuzah that was on the door. So Oisav Yadei Allah, he went ahead and he put his hand on the mezuzah. He put his hand on the mezuzah. For Amalahu, and he said to them, "My high, what's this? What's this? Amulei." Emalon Atz, you tell us what this is. Amalahu, Uncle said to them, Min Haga Shaloilam, Melech Basabadam, Yeshim Befnim, Vavodah Mishamim Mesabim Bechutz. The Melech, he sits in his palace and he has his royal guards outside guarding him. V'yula Kadosh Baruch Hu, Avodah Befnim, the servants are inside, meaning we are inside. V'hu Mishamim Bechutz, right? And the mezuzah protects us from the outside. Shnemar, Hashem Yishmar Tzeischa Uve'achem Yatod Olam. Hashem will guard you going in, and right? They all became a Gearim. Sulay Shada Basrei, and that was it. That's the story. So it's very interesting brought down, guys. Listen, so he touches the mezuzah. So in Hilchas Mezuzah, Siman Reish Pei Hey, Sif Beis. Here's what it says. Nesinasa b'tefach hachitzayin. Mezuzah is placed on the outer tefach. Haga, the Ramah brings down, Yesh oimrim, kishadam yotzim in abayis, when a person leaves his house, yeniach yadei al mezuzah, she put his hand on the mezuzah, V'yoyma, and he should say, Hashem Yishmat Seisi over here. The Maril says, what's the source? Is Agamara. Agamara, this innocuous case where he was going out and he put his hand. This is the Makar for that. That's the kiss, but this is the Makar for putting your hand on the mezuzah, guys. Fascinating, right? Shulchan Aruch Yaredeya Reish Pei Beis. Fascinating. That's the source. Now going back to Antoninus and Rebbe. Now in Parshas Toldos, my bar mitzvah parsha, by the way, right? You have a Rivka is pregnant. She goes to ask. She has Shem ben Noach. Right? Shnei goyim bevitnech. The two nations in your stomach. Right? Two nations are there. Rabbi Avin Sawyer, the older will serve the younger, and that's so. In other words, it's not. Don't think it's one person with a schizophrenic personality. It's two twins. So Vayom Hashem lo shnei goyim bevitnech. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav al tikrei goyim. Don't read it as goyim nations. Ela gayim. Read them as what? As gayim. People who are very choshev. People who are very proud. And Rashi bring this in Chumash, because Rashi gets it from here. Ze Antoninus Rebbe. When it says over here that the gayim, this refers to Antoninus Rebbe. Shlei pasku me'al shulchanam loichazeres loikishus loitznoin. It was never missing from their tables lettuce or cucumbers, horseradish throughout the year. Lo b'mosa chama, lo b'mosa geshamim. The Amamar Snoin mechatech oichel. Snoin goes ahead and it cuts up the food. I guess it helps it digest it. Chazeres mahapech meichel, and chazeres turns over the food. And kishus marchev me'ayim, and kishus gourds or cucumbers, they go ahead and their marchev, they go ahead and expand the kishkes. So in other words, they had these year round. They had these year round, which was a big chiddush, because again, having these year round meaning they had to go ahead and grow them. Now these stuff did not grow in the cold weather. You can't grow the stuff in the cold weather. So the Marsha says that wealthy people, what they would do would be they would have caves, and in these caves they would have a controlled environment, and therefore they were able to grow these vegetables year round. So this growing the vegetables is symbolic of the wealth of Rebbe and Antoninus. So Pashtus, you learn the Gemara, you say, boy, Rebbe had a good vegetable salad the whole year round. But if you look at Tosfos, the first Tosfos, at the end of Tosfos, 4 lines up, it says, V'afagav. V'afagav daminon sheRebbe lo nena min ha'olam afilu be'etzba katana. The Gemara says at the end, right? Rebbe puts all his hands up and he says, I feel I didn't have enough in this world. That's katana frek Tosfos. So what do you tell me? Rebbe was such a mafunik that what? He had to have vegetables the whole year round? He had vegetables all year round? What are you talking about? He had vegetables all year round. Right? I feel be'etzba katana mikomakam oichle shulchanoi hayu rabim. Right? There are many people who ate by his table. So he had this for what? He had this for what? For other people. He hadn't for himself, but for other people to help their digestive tract. Pashas guys, Rebbe had tremendous problems with the bathroom. If you remember, Rebbe used to scream and cry out. So I guess it wouldn't even help him, which would have been a good teretz, guys. As I could have answered Taisus Kasha Pashit. You know why Rebbe needed these things? Because he had digestive issues, right? And therefore he needed them. That would be a mahalach. But again, based upon the Gemara, it's mashma that it wouldn't have helped him anyway. But anyway, the Chalapachas is speaking about the wealth of Rebbe. So there's a very, very beautiful Karas Chaim. I think we did this when we learned Sanhedrin. If we didn't, we're doing it now. And even if we did do it, I don't remember it, so I assume maybe some of you did not as well. The Gemara says, Moshe ad Rebbe le'matzinu Torah gedula b'makam echad. From the days of Moshe Rabbeinu to the days of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, you didn't find Torah gedula in one place. Torah yeshba gimel chelkei. There's 3 parts of Torah. Mikra is the Torah shebachsav, Mishnah the Torah shebapeh, and Shas and the explanation of it. Ulakach geshem sheha mikra nichtav al yidei Moshe. The Torah was written al yidei Moshe Rabbeinu. Shahoya k'Moshe b'chol Yisrael. There was no one like Moshe in all Yisrael. B'Torah u'b'Gedula. There was no one like Moshe. Kacha Mishnah nichtav al yidei Rebbe. The Mishnah was written by Rebbe. Shahoya gam kein k'Moshe b'Torah Gedula. There was no one like him. B'Torah Gedula b'chol Yisrael. Shayidei shahoya gadol b'Torah. The gam b'Gedula. L'kacha yekoyach b'yadai. Therefore, he had the koyach b'yadai, meaning he had the resources. Less life is called chachamim, to gather all the chachamim together. The kibbutz called adinim uperushim, and to anthologize, synthesize all the dinim and perushim. Shenischachim imos Moshe atzmanoi, that was mischadish in the time of Moshe until his day. Because of ala Mishnah, and he wrote it in the Mishnah. The Chen Ravashi, the Fishahaya Godla b'Torah. Ravashi was very wealthy. The Gam Gedula. He also was able to do that. The kibbutz called adinim umemrois shenischachim imos Rabbi ve'elech the kasru lo yalashas. So we find the three people, Moshe, Rabbi, and Ravashi, who were responsible for the three halakim of Torah. Moshe responsible for Mikra, Rabbi responsible for Mishnah, and Ravashi was responsible a lot for what we call Gemara. Like they all had this ability that using their resources, using their wealth to go together and put everything together. It's very geschmacka Torah's Chaim. Now you're asking about. I should have done this a little earlier. I'm sorry. So we spoke about kishus, about the natural positives about kishus. But Tani Rabbi Shmuel, Lama Nikra Shema Kishuin, why are cucumbers called Kishuin? They're very kicharabais. They're hard like swords. So why do you tell me that they're so good? Imashma that they're good, they're marchves ma'ayim. On the other hand, you tell me they're difficult. Like Hasha, Habiravi, the large ones, they're not good, right? The large ones are they're difficult. They're going to harm you. However, Habisutri, the smaller ones were good. They're good for the intestines. Okay. Now the Mishnah had said Yom HaLeida v'Yom HaMisa, that these were days that they would keep the day of the birth of the emperor or the Caesar and the day of the death. So, so what did we say in the Mishnah? Let's go back in time. Let's go back and see what they said. On Daf Chesam Aleph. The Elu Edem shall have the Kachavim, Kalenda, V'Saturunyo, V'Kartas Tesim, V'Yom Ginusa Shamalchayim, V'Yom Aleida, V'Yom Amisa, Divrei Meya. V'Chachamim Moimim Kol Misa Sheyesh B'Sreifa Yesh B'Abayis Kachavim, V'Shein B'Sreifa Ein B'Abayis Kachavim. So Rabbi Meir does not make a distinction whether they burnt for the king or did not burn for the king, whereas the Chachamim they said it depends. It was a Misa that was accompanied with burning of, as we're going to see what they burnt. Then it was what? It was the day of Avodah Zorah. You have to keep away 3 days. If not, then what? Then you would be able to go ahead, right, and do business with them. Okay, that's what the Gemara says. Yom Aleida v'Yom Hamisa, Michlal, we can infer. Michlal, the Remeya, who does not make this distinction between the two, who does not make the distinction between Yom HaSreifa and not Yom HaSreifa. He doesn't make this distinction. On the day of the birth of the emperor, they're going to go ahead and serve the Avodah Zorah. Alma Sreifa lav chukahi. Right, you see that Sreifa is not a chayk. Michlal Rabban Savri Sreifa chuka. Michal, you can infer that they hold Sreifa is a chayk. If what Rashi says, Alma, mid loy toli Remeya time of B'Sreifa. He doesn't make it dependent upon Sreifa. Alma, lav choyk ha'oibit kechavim hu l'shem avodas kechavim. The burning is not a choyk l'shem avodas Zorah. Because if it was, he should make that distinction. For Rabban, the toli tamayu ba k'savi chuka hilahem. That is the choyk for them. Okay, so then it depends. Is it a choyk or not? And then we're going to have the nafkamina b'chuka same loy leichum. But it says so. Therefore, loy Reb Meir, it's not a chayk, and therefore you can't do business because it wasn't etched in stone. Loy, however, the chachamim l'chayre it is a chayk, and therefore what? There's a distinction between the two. Fred the Gemara, right? But Tanya sorfim al malachim v'loy midarki amayri. You're able to go ahead. Nasim Rav Yud Aleph Amid Aleph, where the lines go wide, about 5 lines down. We're saying that they would go ahead and they would burn. We're able, in Jewish law, when a king would die, we would burn. Okay, outside, guys, outside. We have machlokes in the Mishnah. We're speaking about the days that you wouldn't be able to go ahead and do business with them, right? So we're saying if the day of the day of the birth of the king or the day of the death of the king, and Rabbi says you can't do business 3 days before you can't do business. According to Chachamim, it depends. If they burn the day that the king died, they would burn. You can't. If you didn't burn, not. Okay. So light Rebbe, what do you see? Light Rebbe Meir, who does not make a distinction. Obviously, it's not a chayk. It's nothing to do with the sreifa, because he says what? You can't do business even without sreifa. Masha'enkein, the chacham who say sreifa, again, they would burn. We're going to see what it means. They would burn objects of the king. Like, in other words, he had enough from it. No one else can have enough from it. We're going to remove it from the world. So Memela, what do we see? We see that is a chayk. And therefore, where it was not burning, there was no, you don't have to worry. Where there was burning, you have to worry. If that's the case, it's a chayk. How in the world could we burn for Jewish kings? How in the world could we burn for Jewish kings? It says, Ella, what must you say? The kuliyalma sreifa lav chukahi. You have to say sreifa is not a chayk. So if sreifa is not a chayk, right? Ella chashivusa. So what's the difference? What's the machlokes then, guys? If chayk, what's the machlokes? If it's not a chayk, so what's the svar of the chachamim versus Rabbi Meir? V'hacha mifli. Rabbi Meir sava loishna misa sheyesh basreifa, loishna misa she'ein basreifa. Polchi be'lavayis kechavim. They serve the avodah Zorah has nothing whatsoever to do with what? With burning. Rabbanan Savi misa sheyesh basreifa chashiva lahu. If this king was chashiv enough that they would burn, then what? Then they would serve the avodah Zorah polchaba. That's so. Therefore, it didn't have chashivas lepalchuba. So clearly, it's not a chayk. Clearly, it's not a chayk. What's the machlokes? Machlokes is when the king died, right? When the king died, to what extent the chashivas did they give it? Says Reb Meir, whatever, it doesn't make a difference. His death was chashiv enough; they would serve avodah Zorah. Says Reb Chachamim, no, we have another barometer. If they burnt, then if they served, then they would serve avodah Zorah. Can't do business. If they didn't burn, it wasn't chashav by them. They didn't serve avodah Zorah, and therefore you could do business. Kufa, sarf malam malachim. Now, along the way, we asked the kasha that we Jews do burn when it comes to a king. So how could we? It was that, it was part of the question. It was a chayk. How could we do it? And the answer is that what? That it wasn't a chayk. So now we brought that as a kasha. Now gufa, it itself, we're going to analyze that in itself. So Kufa, sarfin ala malachim, the ein boy mishum darchi amoiri. You can burn the objects of the king, and there's no concern that is considered darchi amoiri. Shenamar, the pasuk says, this is by Tzidkiyahu HaMelech, and he's assured by Yirmiyahu that b'shalom tamus, you'll die b'shalom, uvemisr fais avaisecha, and hamalachim. So it says they would burn. Ukeshem shesofin al malachim. Just like they would burn on malachim, they would burn on Nesiyim. Umahin sarfim, guys, what would they burn? Al malachim, mitasan, they would burn the bed that they slept in. In other words, the king slept in this bed, no one else is ever going to sleep in this bed, they would burn it. The kli tashmishan, and the kalim mat that they would go ahead and use. And the kalim that they would go ahead and use, these would be burnt, that no one else can use them. Now you just said above, there was not only Sorfin on Malachim, guys, but there's Sorfin on Nesiyim. The Nesiyim were the direct descendants, right? After the destruction, they were after the ending of the Malachim, the direct descendants of David HaMelech, the heads were called the Nesiyim, right? And the Nasi and the Avbezdim, we have it throughout Shas. So Rabbi Gamliel, who was a Nasi, Saraf Alav, Unclis Hager, Shivim Mana Tsuri. Unclis Hager, he burnt 70 monatsuri. L'chari, he's burning money. Aiva Amit Mahin Sar from Aleim. He tells him the Kli Tashmishan. So l'chayra, that's not Kli Tashmishan. That's not his bed. Why is he burning money? So Ema b'shivim monatsuri. He burnt. He didn't burn money. He burnt things that were worth shivim money. In other words, he burned Kli Tashmishan, and these Kli Tashmishan that he burnt were in fact worth that amount of money. They were worth that money. Now you have a interesting machlokes over here, guys. When did Unclis Hager live? Right, he lived in the time of the Churban Bayis Sheni. Rabbi Gamliel HaZaken was way before. So how could they be at the same time? Right. So the Rashash says take out the word Zaken. Just say Rabbi Gamliel. Yet the Yavit says Ken Zayin there were two uncluses. He says Ken Zayin there were two uncluses. It's a very interesting machloikis between the Yavits and the Rashash. The Yavit says that there were two, and he brings out the Seidah Doiris also said there were two of them. There were two of them. Okay, either way, so it's not that he burnt money, X amount of money, but he birthed Kli Tashmishon that was worth X amount of money. Now he used to ride on a horse. He used to ride on a horse. So the Gemara wants to know the following. This Umidi Achrina Loi, they didn't go ahead and destroy something else that belonged to the king. For Tanya, Oikrin Ala Malachim, they would go ahead and do some type of disabling of the horse. They would cut the some type of tendon on the horse, right? The Emboy Mishum Darchi Amoiri, Ayla Chayra, where's the Kli Tashmishin over here? So Amra Papa Besush Rachavalav. Enochinami. It's the sus that he wrote on. Since he wrote on it, it has the din of Kli Tashmishan. Since he wrote on it, it had the halacha of Kli Tashmishan, and therefore what? Therefore, you disabled it. Okay. Fred Gemara ubehemet to hayra loy. A sus is a behemet tameya, but you're telling me they would not disable a behemet to hayra. But Tanya ika sheyesh batreifa asa ushein batreifa muta. A disabling, a cutting of the tendon that would render the animal a treif is asa. If what is with the muta, frek toisvis fellas. Iker ikem amalachim and taimar. V'mayle parech v'yikat sab alichayim. How can you disable it? That's sab alichayim. Ki the parech lekamon. Gabi noisa v'noisa b'shuk shel avodas kechavim. The bishleim mishum bal tashkes frek toisvis. Forget about what? About sab alichayim. What about tashkas? You're just you're ruining an animal for no reason. Leka, the kivin the chvoidish shamelach ha'isakain ein kach hashchasa. It's not about tashkas because you're doing it to cover the king. Ela havi k'may tachrichin shel meya mana. Like they would bury, let's say, bury with a very, very expensive ice about tashkas. No, to cover the king or wherever you bury in very expensive clothing. El etzar balichayim hut ein in het hutter. Yeshleimar the shiny covered on melech. Shehu covered shlechol Yisrael. By giving cover to the king, we're giving cover to Klal Yisrael. The Yossi covered Rabbim v'dachat sabalichayim. Comes along, the Taisa says a Yisoid, that when it comes to the Rabbim, it's dechat sabalichayim. So whatever tzad the animal has is nitcha al yidei, the cover of Yisrael, by going ahead and uprooting this horse. Bottom line is, we see over here that a behemoth tahira also would be disabled. What kind of kli tashmishon would it be by a behemoth tahira? What kind of kli tashmishon behemoth? What's the ikar, a disabling of the animal, the cutting of a tendon, that what does not render it a treifa? Is speaking, if you cut the tendon from below the arkuva, if you cut above the arkuva, it makes it a treifa. Below the arkuva. So in other words, if you cut it, make sure you're cutting the behemoth tahira in a place where it might get a treifa. But what's the kasha? Where's the klita? You're telling me that the only thing you go ahead and burn is a bed, and kli tashmishan, burn, lav dafka burning, but destroying that no one else could use it. So by a horse, you said it's kli tashmishan because he wrote on it. What shayach kli tashmishan by behemoth tahira? Says the Tegmar Papa, the egla hamayshechas b'karoin. He was speaking about what the egla, the calves, they would go ahead and what pull a wagon that the king would sit in, and therefore what an egla is a kosher animal. Since the king used it, it had a din mad of Kli Tashmishon, and then Mela what? You're able to go ahead and disable it. Okay, that's the sugya. The Mishnah said that the Yom Tiglachas. I'm going back to Ches again. Ches Amid Aleph. Another day that's a problem for them. This is a personal. Is not. Now we're getting into individuals. Al Yom Tiglacha Zikna, they would go ahead and cut their beard, ublurios, and they're blurious. That's some type of Mongol cut. Yom Sha'ala Boy Min Ayam. Okay, now when it says Yom Tiglacha, it's Yom Blurious. What does it mean? Are you cutting the blurious or are you leaving the blurious? The Gemara has a shaila. What exactly are you doing with this blurious? So it's Yom Tiglacha Zikna when he shave his beard, and and blurious. Iboilahu. Heichi Ketani. When the Mishnah says regarding blurious, what did it mean? Yom Tiglachas the Kana, the day he cut his beard, Vanachas bluriousai, and he left the blurious. Aidilma, Yom Tiglachas Ziknoi, Vavaras bluriosai. Just he cut his beard and he took off the blurious. Tashma, the Tanya Travayu, you have a source, both of them. Yom Tiglachas Ziknoi Vanachas bluriosai, you leave it. Yom Tiglachas Ziknoi Vavaras blurious. Either one is a day of Avodah Zorah for that particular guy, whether you're leaving the blurious or cutting it off the same day that you cut your beard. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mishmol. That another Yom Tif in Rome, and this one is very, very painful. This one is very, very painful. Achas l'shivim shana, once every 70 years, Mevin Adam Shalem, they would bring a person who is complete, Umar Kivnoisai al Adam Chigar, and they would have him ride upon a cripple. Now, the healthy person was symbolic of Esav, and the cripple was symbolic of Yaakov. That Yaakov had been gone ahead, and he was the Malach of Esav had touched him in his Gira Nosha, and he was hinkedik. He was a little bit. So they would do that. Umalbishin Isai, big day Adam Arishain, and the one who was on top, the healthy one Esav, they went ahead and they put on the garments of Adam Arishain. Guys, if you might remember the story, Adam Arishain was given clothing by Kadosh Baruch Hu. He was scared of the animals, and Kadosh Baruch Hu gave him clothing Kasnas Ar, and they bring this machloikas what it was, but according to Mandeya, on this they had all the animals on this clothing, and this clothing was whoever wore it had shlita over the animals. So the yichus of this clothing was obviously Noah had gotten it, Chum stole it, and it was given to, as a result, it was given to Chum's son Nimrod. That's why the Torah says that Nimrod was a Gibet Sayed. He was a tremendous hunter. Why was he a tremendous hunter? He was a tremendous hunter because why? He was able to capture animals because he had this clothing, right? Esav, beginning of Toldos, Esav comes back from the field, Behu Oyef, and he finds Yaakov cooking lentils because that was the day Avram died. Why was he say Oyef? Esav came back from killing Nimrod. And Esav, as a result of killing Nimrod, got the clothing. When Yaakov goes to get the brachas, it says he's wearing big day Esav chamudais. Chamud is lashon chemda. It's either chemda or chamud that was stolen. L'chayre Esav had his clothing. They bequeathed it to Rome. They still had it. They still had it. If you go through the yichus of this clothing, it's peladik. They still had it. They still had it. And you're talking about the Bayasheni. The Romans in the Bayasheni. So they went ahead and they dressed up this person who was whole, who was symbolic of Esav. They dressed them up wearing this clothing. And they left on his head the skin of Rabbi Yishmael. On Yom Kippur, when we go through the Asari Rugi Malchus fellas, when we go through Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha, he was beautiful. And the Roman empress daughter wanted to leave him alive for herself. And he said, well, no, we're going to kill him. She goes, at least give me his skin. And that they had no problem doing. And they skinned his, and they kept his skin in formaldehyde. Look at this Rashi, guys. Look at this Rashi. Says Rashi, Kakifle shel Rabbi Yishmael, Kohen Gadol, Umearuge Malchus Haya. Umitoich Yafyav, because of his beauty, Nichnas Belev Bas Kesar. The Hifshit Or Panov, they skinned his skin off his face. The Chanta Bafar Samoin. I call it a formaldehyde. And they embalmed it in a farsamoin, that it should go ahead and continue to exist. And it shouldn't change. Listen to this. Munach begins a roime. Says Rashi, it's still munach begins a roime. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. What they say is down there is anyway. If they would this question whether it's a big shiloh what happened. The kalim of the Bayasheni. They were taken away by the Romans. They were taken away by the Romans if they're still there or not, because Rome was overcome by the Moors. So, yesh. Some people say in the catacombs of Rome they have, but if they would have it, among them would be. Can you imagine? They have the skin of Rabbi Yishmael and Elisha. So they would take out his skin, and they would put it on the head of this person that was Shalem. V'tolele miskal Rav Zuzah de Pisa, and they took a stone. a very precious stone that weighed 200 zuz, and they would hang it, and they would hang it around his neck. They covered the streets with the einach, was this onyx stone. And they walk in front of him, and they would say, Sach kiri plaster. Sach, the amount, kiri of the ruler, is plaster is wrong. Rashi says, what is it speaking about? Let's see Rashi. Sach kiri plaster, cheshbon hakotzim kozavhu. The cheshbon of his is a lie. Nevuas Yaakov shekar lebanav la'achras hayomim shesoifim ligoyel kozavhu. The time whatever he gave is a kozav, because look, here we are, we're in charge. Let's see Taisvis. Sach kiri plaster, Pirush HaKontris, shekarin Yaakov kiri, v'lein hira sheyikru Yaakov odon. That they would call Yaakov an odon, that's not correct, says Taisvis. Well, Kach Pirush HaBeinu Tam say Yitzchak, shekarin kiri, lefisha hoya, we have Lashon over here, he was ziknoi. What's the Gersa? Dalid, Sekanim, that he was a Zaking. And Hayinogim Bakovid, Klema, Habrocha Shenasan Yaakov plaster. The brachas that Yitzchak gave to Yaakov, that Yaakov stole, right, is a lie. So it's not going on the kates, it's going on the brachas that was stolen. Like Rashi, the Sach, the curious Yaakov, like Tosfos is going on. So in other words, like Rashi, it's the lie of Yaakov when the kates is going to come. Like Tosfos, the bracha is a lie. Like Tosfos, the bracha is a lie. Very good shema. Achuha de Marona Zaifana, the brother of our leader of Esav, is a zayif, he's a forger, he's a cheat. The chame, you look what he is, right now. One who would see this with the loichami, since it's every 70 years, you can only see it once. Pashas people won't live that long, so if you're seeing it now, you're seeing it for the last time. I saw guys. Taras Chaim says beautifully. Why every 70 years? They learned that Bavel was 70 years. So they figured the God of the Jews, if he doesn't redeem you every 70 years, so Mamela, every 70 years they would go ahead and Machnach Hayantiv. Because they figured 70 was a school, a school of, the Jews are going to get it? No. So every 70 years they did it. Okay. Maya Hani Luramoy Bramusa. What did Yaakov gain by stealing the brachas? Ul Zaife, Bezafnuse, or the Cheetah, Umisaimim Habahachi. But nonetheless, they said a little bit of truth. Vailedain Kad Yomedain. Woe to Esav when this one Yaakov comes about. In other words, the bottom line is for Rav Yaakov Tzoyer, you can make Azoi, you can go ahead and be in first place, but guess what? Not forever. And they knew that. Violet Dane, Kadyokim Dane. Woe when this one comes up in front of this one. Amravashi. Hechshilim Piyam B'Shoyim. The mouth of B'Shoyim, they make them nichshol, stumble. Iyam Zaifa Achua Merona. If they would have said that a cheater is the brother of our master Kid Amri. Hashta the Amri the Marona Zaifa. But they didn't put the Zaifa Marona, they put what? Marona Zaifa. They put what? The brother first they seem to be saying Marona Gufa Zaifa. They begin saying Marona Zaifa, Amoran, Amesta Zaifa, he's a cheat. But done my time like a chashav. So why didn't in the list of all the Yom Tovim, why didn't they consider this one? And for the Gemara, the one that was year to year, they went ahead and considered. The less of the Kol Shata but the one that was every 70 years, that doesn't go ahead and make the cheshbon. The one that was every 70 years doesn't make the cheshbon. Hani Rumai, so you got a list of the Yom Tovim of the Goyim, of the Romans. Who the Parsoi Mai, what are the Yom Tovim of the Persians? Okay, here's a list that I'm sure we're all familiar with. Mutarde, Turiske, Muharakte, Umaharane. Says Gemara, Hani the Pars of the Romans. So you gave the list of the Persians and the Romans, the Bavloimai. What about the Babylonians? Maharanke, Vachnise, Vachnune, the Esa Ba'adar, and the 10th day of Adar. That seems to be a yontif for them. Okay. Now, none of these, I don't think we know anything about these things. Again, Bisman Azeh, they don't do Avodah Zorah. We saw the halacha. The Chutz La'aretz, you don't have to be makbin these things. So again, it's interesting to learn, but regarding halacha, it's pretty much a moot point. Amar Rav Chana Bar Chisda Amar Rav, Vimila Amrav Chana bar Rava Amarav. Chamisha bate avodas kechavim kevuyin hein. There are 5 bate kevuyin. Eluhain. Base Baal beBavel, base Baal in Bavel, base Nevoi beKursi, and the place of Kursi is called base Nevoi. Tarata shebemafog, Tarata, which is in the town of Mafog, Tzarifa sheba Ashkelon, and Nishra sheba Araya, and Nishra, which is in Arabia. Kiyas Rav Dimi, he gave another list. Haisifa Aleim Yurid sheba Ein Bechi. The Yurid is they had a marketplace, a fair sheba Ein Bechi. The Vacha sheba Akoy and Vacha in Akoy. It could yamin is bar sheba Akoy. Rav Dimi Me'adoi Masna Yevcha. He said the opposite. Yurid sheba Akoy, the Yurid in Akoy, and Vacha shein Bechi. So the question was the Yurid in Bechi or in Akoy Machlokes? Amir Rav Chana bar Rav Chisda said, Rav Chana, the son of Rav Chisda, my kavuya heim. When they said their kai, what does kavua mean? Amalei. So Rav Chisda told the son, Hachi ama avua the yimach. This is what the father of your mother said. Kavuyin heim la'olam tediri kula shasa. They're fixed in the way that what they every year they go through the other year polchulei. Every year they go ahead and they serve Avodah Zorah. Amashmuel. The goyla ain't asa el yamei number bad. There's nothing. It's 3 days before the yontif. You only asa in the yontif itself. The Eidim Nami Miyasar, for the Gemara, is the day of the Eid Asa of Rav Yehuda, Sharila Rav Runa Lezune Chamra. Rav Yehuda permitted Rav Runa to sell wine to the Goyim. Rav Gidol is Zvune Chitim B'Chag Ksad Taya, and Rav Gidol was able to sell wheat on this day, the Chag of the Taya. So it's more shiny Chag of the Taya, like Kavua. Since it's not Kavua, again, only when it's Kavua is a problem. Since it's not Kavua, it's not a problem.